Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon when you are watching this video lecture. In the earlier sessions related to the chapter and head of income capital gains, we discussed about the charging section of this head, that is section 45, which required a transfer of capital asset during the previous year so that gain or loss arising from such transfer can be taxed under this head. And as a part of understanding the charging section, we also discussed about what is a capital asset and what is not a capital asset, and also very importantly what is the definition of transfer under section 247. Also, what are the transactions which are not regarded as transfer under section 47. And coming to the capital assets, what is the difference between short-term capital asset and long-term capital asset? How to classify them we have discussed. And once we classified them, how to compute the long-term capital gain and short-term capital gain under section 48 also we discussed in the earlier sessions. And very importantly, while computing the short-term and long-term capital assets, computation of or determination of period of holding under certain special circumstances is another particular point of discussion which we already discussed in the earlier sessions. So other than the basic things of what is a capital asset, what is not, how to distinguish long-term, short-term, other than them and other than just calculation of capital gains, two major discussions related to special circumstances we already had. One of them is computation of period of holding under special circumstances. Second one is what are the transactions which are not regarded as transfer under section 47. And today let us discuss one more such very important theoretical aspect, provisional conceptual aspect related to cost of acquisition of capital assets under specified circumstances. Once again, cost of acquisition under normal circumstances is nothing but purchase price. There ends the matter. We don't need all this. So always, if it is a normal purchase and sale of a capital asset, there is no big deal. Already we know how to calculate that. But under certain specified circumstances, how to compute, how to ascertain the cost of acquisition is contained in section 49 of the Income Tax Act. So this is also a special section which elaborates about different situations or circumstances in which we have to compute the cost of acquisition in a little different manner, not just as if it is the cost of purchase. What are those situations and how the cost of acquisition has to be ascertained under those special circumstances? Let us discuss in today's session. First and foremost thing is when the asset is acquired under different modes of acquisition, in the following cases, the cost of acquisition to the previous owner itself is deemed to be the cost of acquisition of current owner also. And let me once again remind you of the words that are used in this chapter. Each word is very important and unique. When we say acquisition, it is as good as purchase but not purchase. If it was purchase, we don't need to worry about all these points. But asset was acquired by the SSC under different circumstances. That means there is a previous owner from whom the SSC has acquired this asset. So cost of acquisition is different. Consideration is different. Consideration is something that will be earned by the SSC when the asset is transferred by the SSC. That generally happens during the previous year. Of course, in certain special cases, it might happen earlier years also other than the previous year. But that is a transfer, which is asset going out situation. This is what cost of acquisition, that means asset coming in. situation. So each word we have to understand what actually has happened, what is happening. So transfer is different, acquisition is different. These are the only two things. Always the words are those. SSC will acquire the asset and then he will transfer the asset. That's all. Now, what are we talking about in section 49? When the SSC has acquired the asset. Okay, he has acquired the asset. If he purchased it, there is no problem. Whatever the purchase price is, that is cost of acquisition. But there could be other modes also through which the SSC would have acquired the asset, not by just purchase. In that case, what? Those are the cases we are talking about, which are section 49(1) situations. If you remember, period of holding discussion, in that also, in all the cases of 49(1), period of holding of the previous owner shall be included in the period of holding of the present owner, that is SSC. That was a different application of it. But instances are same. What are those 49(1) instances? Let us understand now. So what happens in the following cases? In the following cases, the cost of acquisition of asset shall be deemed to be the cost for which the previous owner of the property has originally acquired it. So, SSC did not buy it, he got it. That means there was a previous owner who originally purchased it. Later, the original owner has transferred it to the SSC. SSC did not purchase it, or it is not like a normal acquisition, it is an acquisition in a different way. In that case, how to take the cost of acquisition of asset in the hands of the SSC? Because he did not purchase it, it is not easy to find out. So what should we do? What we have to do is, we have to take whatever the cost of acquisition of assets may be related to the previous owner, as if it is the cost of acquisition of SSC also. And not only that, cost of improvement to this asset also should be included as a normal deduction. And the cost of improvement could be done by whom? Maybe by the previous owner also, or even by the SSC also. For example, if a SSC acquired the asset by way of gift, then original owner of the asset who has gifted that asset to the SSC, he purchased it at some price. That is cost of acquisition of original owner. SSC did not purchase it. Actually speaking, the cost of acquisition of SSC is 0. So should we take 0 as cost of acquisition? No. We have to take cost of acquisition to the previous owner as if it is the cost of acquisition of SSC. So that will be taken as the cost of acquisition of the SSC himself, though he did not incur it. But what about cost of improvement? Original owner would have also done some improvements, possible. Are they allowed as deduction? Yes. Even after getting this asset as a gift, SSC might have done some improvements also. Is that allowed as deduction? Again, yes. So, cost of acquisition and cost of improvement, both can be taken as deductions, of course. But when it comes to cost of improvement, that might have been incurred by the SSC himself or the previous owner, as the case may be. Both are allowed as deduction. When it comes to cost of acquisition, SSC did not incur anything. So naturally the cost of acquisition of previous owner itself becomes the cost of acquisition for SSC also. That's what is 49(1) telling us about. A special circumstance where the cost to previous owner is deemed to be the cost of acquisition of asset for the SSC also. And what are those circumstances? One by one. Where the capital asset became the property of the SSC on any distribution of assets on total or partial partition of HUF. So distribution of assets happened by HUF. We know that. For HUF it was not a transfer. Every transaction is linked. For HUF it is not a transfer because it was excluded from the definition of transfer according to 47. But for the SSC, who was a member of HUF, he got the asset. No? When he got the asset, nothing is taxable. But what if when he sells this asset? Then definitely he would have received some consideration, which is a fact. That is not a problem here. Problem is what? What was his cost of acquisition? Did he purchase them? No. He just got them from his HUF as one of the assets distributed due to total or partial partition of HUF. So how to take the cost of acquisition of the asset in the hands of this individual member now? He did not purchase it. How to take it? No need to break our heads. Whatever the HUF has originally paid for acquiring that asset, that will be considered as if it is the cost of acquisition of asset for this member also. So, if the asset was given to the SSE, or we can say capital asset became the property of the SSE by virtue of distribution of assets on the total or partial partition of a HUF, then cost of acquisition in the hands of previous owner, in this case HUF, will become the cost of acquisition in the hands of SSE also. Same logic applies to gift or will. Once again, SC is who here? The one who has gifted or the one who has received the gift? The one who has received the gift. The one who has gifted, nothing was taxable for him because it was not a transfer first of all. Already excluded from the definition of transfer under section 47. But now what happened? SC received that gift, then nothing is taxable. It will be taxable if at all. Income from other sources provisions will apply. We will come to that. However, under capital gains nothing is taxable upon giving the gift also, upon receiving the gift also. But when it will be taxable? When the gift that is received has been sold or transferred. Here also, there is no problem with full value of consideration. That is clear. Why? Because SC has really sold it, really transferred it. But problem comes with what? Cost of acquisition. So, what is the cost of acquisition to the SC? Originally 0. But should we take 0? No. So, what should we take? Whatever the cost of acquisition of previous owner is, that itself will be taken as cost of acquisition of current owner. Same logic. Same way, if the asset was acquired by way of a succession, inheritance or devolution, whatever the names may be, same case here also. SC has got the asset. He did not buy the asset. Maybe he is the legal heir of somebody, he has inherited some property, or somebody has devolved some assets onto him, or properties were devolved onto him, whatever the names may be. Then also, cost of acquisition to the previous owner becomes the cost of acquisition of the asset for the SSE also. And on distribution of assets on liquidation of the company, very important point this also. Each of them is a transaction, separate situation, and it has a sequence. Always in capital gains, as I told already, story is very important. Entire sequence is very important. If you take each of them has a full story. What was the story? In each of the cases, there is one original owner. In the first case, the original owner was HUF. In the second case, somebody else who has gifted that asset or given that asset to the SSE by way of will, succession, inheritance or devolution. In the fourth case, the original owner is company. Company was the owner of the assets. Upon liquidation, the company has distributed the assets to the SSE. And once again, you have to remember, was it there in section 47? Yes, that is also there in section 47. Why? Because that is not a transfer for company. So, the story is always multi-layered. It is not just one shot transaction. So, let us understand the transaction of liquidation in a simple manner. SSE has purchased the shares of a company originally. That is where it started. SSE purchased the shares. Is it anything wrong? Nothing wrong. Is there anything taxable? Nothing taxable. He purchased the shares. Shares bought. Then, for some years he has held those shares. After some years, the company went into liquidation. Then company got liquidated. Fine. Company got liquidated. Upon liquidation, what the company will do? The company has distributed assets to the shareholders, and as a part of that distribution, our SSE also got some assets. So when SSE originally purchased the shares, nothing taxable event. when company distributed assets to the shareholders, that is not taxable. Why? Because it is not regarded as transfer under section 47 in the hands of company. But SC got these assets, no? He did not buy the assets, he bought the shares. Now he got these assets. So what can we say? Here we will come to that point later. He purchased originally the shares, but in lieu of those shares, he got assets now. So can we say that these shares are as good as transferred for the consideration of these assets? Yes, we can say. Is that a taxable event? Quite possible. We will come to that event later. That is upon liquidation what happens in the hands of shareholder. But very clear. He purchased originally shares, but because of liquidation he has given up all those shares, and in lieu of that he got assets. That is a transfer. For shareholder it is a transfer, and definitely that becomes taxable. How it becomes taxable? We will come to that part later. Because understand, in this case cost of acquisition is not the problem, because he purchased the assets really. How much he purchased the shares for, that is a fact. Problem comes with full value of consideration of these assets. This may be in cash, may not be in cash. Then a question comes, how to take full value of consideration? We will answer that question when that topic comes. But one point for sure is, cost of acquisition of shares is not a problem here. Full value of consideration upon transfer of those shares and in lieu of that getting the assets is a transaction. That is a problem. But that is not what we are looking at in 49. That is not what this is. But next level one more changed. These assets are sold by the SSE. Again, these assets are sold means, here how much they are sold for is not a problem. Here sale proceeds is not a problem, because that is fact. But the question is, what about the cost of acquisition of these assets? So when the SSE has received these assets, upon distribution of assets, on liquidation of the company, if the SSE has got these assets and then he sold those assets, what will be the cost of acquisition of those assets? In that case, whatever the cost of acquisition earlier it was there for the company, that itself will be the cost of acquisition for SSE also. That is what we are looking at in the fourth point. So multiple layers are there. When we look at each of these transactions in a separate manner, we can understand through the entire transaction. But each of them has its own implications. For example, here, when the SSE got these assets because of this liquidation, that itself is a transfer. That is taxable in the hands of SSE. That is one level. Second level, when those assets are again sold by the SSE, that is another transfer. That is also taxable in the hands of the SSE. But what is not a transfer in this entire thing? Company distributing assets to the SSE, to the shareholders, is not a transfer, because as per section 47, it was excluded from the definition of transfer. Like that, liquidation is one transaction, which is a variety transaction. When liquidation happens, what are all the tax consequences? We will discuss them separately. But at this point, what we have to understand, the cost of acquisition of assets for the SSE, which were received upon distribution of such assets on the liquidation of the company, is there. That will be nothing but the cost of acquisition to the previous owner. Previous owner is who? Company. That's it. Then, another way of getting the assets is same. Transfer to a revocable or irrevocable trust. So SSE once again did not purchase them. He received the assets by way of transfer from somebody else who created a revocable or irrevocable trust on behalf of the SSE. So there is no problem. When those assets are sold by the SSE, again full value of consideration is not a problem. What is cost of acquisition? That will be the cost of acquisition to the previous owner. So cost of acquisition to the previous owner itself becomes cost of acquisition of the SSE in all these cases. What are those? When the SSE acquired the asset by virtue of total or partial partition of HUF, when the SSE has acquired the asset under a gift or will or succession or inheritance or devolution, or when the SSE has acquired the asset by way of distribution of assets upon the liquidation of the company, or when the SSE got these assets by way of transfer from somebody through an irrevocable or a revocable trust. That's it. And other one we know already. Transfer of assets by holding company to 100% subsidiary or subsidiary company to 100% holding. Transferee should be always Indian company. In that case, that transaction itself is not a transfer, right? When the transfer happened, it is not a transfer. But what are we talking about? Next level. Next level is what we are talking about. So the same transaction, if you see, it is there in three different scenarios so far. Once again, the logic has to be applied. If, let us say, there is a holding company which is a 100% holding company of an Indian subsidiary company, and a holding company has transferred the assets to Indian subsidiary company. If that is the situation, what are all the things that we have already discussed? And what is that we are looking at now is a similar thing. But this happens when this will be applicable. This will be applicable when the next level of transaction happens. So in all the cases what we are looking at, whether it is partial or total partition of HUF, gift, will, inheritance, in all the cases, one thing is common. There is a previous owner. In our case, just example, this could be reverse also, but just for example, let us take holding company has transferred some assets to subsidiary company. Okay, fine. Is that a transfer? Is that transaction regarded as transfer? No, it is not, because section 47 said it is not a transfer if the relationship is 100% holding and subsidiary, and if the transferee is an Indian company. That is conditional, but it is not a transfer if those conditions are satisfied. But that is not what we are looking at. When this subsidiary company has sold these assets to somebody, it has received them from holding company, and then subsidiary company has sold them to somebody. So at what price they have sold them, that is clear, no problem. Now what is the question mark? Question mark is, what is the cost of acquisition for subsidiary company? It did not purchase them, it just got them from holding company. So what is the cost of acquisition in the hands of subsidiary company? Whatever is the cost of acquisition in the hands of holding company, that itself will become the cost of acquisition for subsidiary company also. Same logic. Swap it, still it is same logic. Subsidiary to holding also, holding to subsidiary also. As long as transferee is an Indian company and the relationship is 100%, then cost of acquisition of previous owner will become the cost of acquisition of current owner. That is the one who is transferring this asset now, subsidiary company. But point is, when are we looking at this is what we have to understand. When this original first level transaction happened, we don't need this. That was not a transfer. What should we do? Actually nothing. There is nothing to be done. There is no transfer at all, right? So that first transaction is not at all attracted by this chapter. This chapter is attracted by the second transaction. When the subsidiary company sold this to somebody else, to whom it sold, we don't care. Somebody, third party. Then, what is the cost of acquisition of such assets which were sold? Simple. Whatever the cost of acquisition for holding company was, that itself will be the cost of acquisition for subsidiary company also. That is what is another scenario, we can say, in this case. Transfer from holding to subsidiary and subsidiary to holding. And you can observe one more point here. Most of these cases, the first transaction was not a transfer at all. You can observe that also. Most of these cases. Distribution of assets on total or partial partition of HUF. That first transfer is not a transfer. Gift, will, inheritance, succession. First, originally it is not a transfer. Distribution of assets on liquidation of company for company transfer, it is not a transfer. Same way, assets transferred by a holding company to subsidiary company or vice versa. Originally it was not a transfer. So the first level of transaction was considered not a transfer. And the second level of transaction had a problem of identifying what is the cost of acquisition. Answer is same for all. Answer is same. Logic is same. Only situations are different. Logic is what? Cost of acquisition of previous owner is the cost of acquisition of current owner. Who is the previous owner? That may change. In first case, the previous owner might be HUF. In the second case, original person who has donated or gifted or written the will, and who was the original owner, legal person who has transferred the assets is the original owner, like that. In case of liquidation, company is the original owner. In case of transfer of assets through irrevocable trust, whoever has transferred, he is the original owner. In this case, whoever is the original owner, holding company also, subsidiary company also. So the cost of acquisition to previous owner itself becomes the cost of acquisition of SSE is the essence that we should understand. Same logic applies, continues. Any transfer of capital asset by amalgamating company to the amalgamated Indian company. Always transferee has to be Indian company, whether it is amalgamation, demerger or holding to subsidiary relationship. So in a scheme of amalgamation, amalgamating company has transferred certain assets to amalgamated company. Then same logic, let us call it amalgamating company, transferred to amalgamated company. Ting and TED, okay? Amalgamating company is the original company, which is got liquidated also. It transferred the assets to the amalgamated company. Was that a transfer? No, it was not a transfer. So first level of transaction is gone. Now it is not we are talking. Now this amalgamated company is sold to somebody. Same thing. Question is, what is the cost of acquisition for this company? Whatever is the cost of acquisition for amalgamating company, that itself will be the cost of acquisition for amalgamated company also. And by the way, you can also understand in all these circumstances, period of holding of previous owner shall be included in the period of holding of current owner also. That also we discussed. Same points. Logic is same, points are same, but situations are different. Then another thing, demerger. Same way. Demerged company has transferred assets to resulting company. Was that a transfer? No. There was a original company which was demerged company. Now this piece is taken out, and because of that so what are these pieces? So this piece is taken out, and because of that this is called as resulting company. This is a resulting company. This was the demerged company. So demerged company naturally transferred some assets to resulting company. That was not a transfer, we know that. That is not the point we are talking. Now resulting company sold to somebody these assets. What was the cost of acquisition for resulting company? It didn't buy them, it just got them from demerged company. No problem. Whatever the cost of acquisition of these assets was for demerged company, same thing will be the cost of acquisition for resulting company also. Same logic. So all these cases have logically same point. Same way, conversion of an individual of his separate property into HUF property. So now who is the transferor? Individual. Transferred what? Some property to HUF. When individual transfers something to HUF, that's okay. But when HUF sold that to somebody, HUF did not buy that. He just got it from that individual. Then what will be the cost of acquisition in the hands of HUF? Whatever the cost of acquisition of that asset was for that member who has originally converted that individual private property into HUF property, that will be the cost of acquisition for HUF also. We'll come to this HUF transaction separately for the individual, but as far as HUF is concerned now, definitely because it did not purchase this asset, it was only just received by HUF from one of its members. Whatever the cost of acquisition of that individual was originally, that becomes the cost of acquisition for HUF also. But one point always we have to remember, we are not talking about the first level transaction, we are talking about the second level transaction where the receiver, originally who was the transferee, now became a seller or transferor, because of which he is receiving some consideration, which is clear. But question was and problem was only about determining how much was his cost of acquisition, because he did not buy this asset, he got this asset by all these any of these modes. Then answer is same for all. Whatever the cost of acquisition for the previous owner was, the same amount will become the cost of acquisition for the present transferor, the current owner. So all cases have one thing in common. These are second level transactions at which time we are required to even look at the cost of acquisition. Otherwise, this first level transaction is not what we are talking about. Of course, in most of the cases, the first level transaction was exempt. It is not at all taxable because it was excluded from the definition of transfer. But observe it, not in all cases, most of the cases. Not necessarily that you can draw a direct link between section 47 and 49. 100% link cannot be established, but can it be established more or less? Logical level, yes. There are certain cases where the original transfer is also not excluded from the definition of transfer. We will come to those transactions when we discuss them in future classes. But as far as many of the transactions in these 9 are concerned, for transferor originally, none of them was transfer in the first level, but transferee has acquired these assets by virtue of all these possible transactions, and now when his sales are decided to sell these assets to somebody else, cost of acquisition to this person, our SSE, becomes nothing but the cost of acquisition of the previous owner. That is the first point, very important, section 49(1). Why is that? If you observe carefully, the link is established very clearly. Period of holding of previous owner should be included in the period of holding of present owner. Yes, in all these cases that's also there. And transactions not regarded as transfer. If not all, most of these transactions are not regarded as transfer. 9th one is a transfer. We'll come to that later. Other than that, remaining are all transfers. 5th one also, revocable trust is a transfer. Irrevocable trust is not a transfer. So, keeping those exceptions apart, most of these transactions originally are not regarded as transfer in the first level. In the second level is what we are talking about, the cost of acquisition to the present owner. So accordingly, all the above cases, for determining the period for which the capital asset is held by the transferee, the period of holding of the asset by the previous owner shall also be considered, and we know that. This is already a known point, nothing new. Only thing is, now we are looking at determination of cost of acquisition under specified circumstances under section 49. So 3 logical things in one shot. Period of holding, one discussion. Transactions not regarded as transfer, one discussion. How to compute cost of acquisition under special circumstances is another discussion. All the 3 have some common link if you observe. And that link, if you catch it, that's it. You don't need to by heart it. That link is easy to understand and remember, nothing to separately by heart it, because logic prevails in all of them. Exceptional cases, logic will not be there. Those things anyway we will discuss when they are encountered. Right now, all these circumstances are similar to what we already discussed in the earlier 2 cases of determination of period of holding as well as transactions not regarded as transfer in most of the cases. Now, second point, same thing, but we are not talking about company here. Look at the words here. Shares in an amalgamated company. When the shares in amalgamated company, of course, amalgamated company is the transferee always, and transferee should be always an Indian company, that we know. Every time we don't have to separately stress on that. Where the shares in amalgamated company became property of the SSE. How they became property of the SSE? Did he purchase them? No. They became property of the SSE in consideration of transfer of shares held by him in the amalgamating company under a scheme of amalgamation. That's what happened. Once again, are we talking about companies? No, we are not talking about companies here. We are talking about shareholder. So in a transaction of amalgamation, what all can happen? So many things can happen. We have to understand the entire transaction. So let us take an example so that it can be easily understood. There is A Limited, which got amalgamated, and it became now B Limited. So which means what? A Limited is no more there. And by the way, there are shareholders also in A Limited, naturally, who hold some shares in A Limited. What they hold are shares. They already hold. This is the existing scenario. A Limited is there. Shareholders of A Limited are there. Suddenly, what is the transaction that happened? That's what we are calling it as amalgamation. Amalgamation happened. Okay, fine. When amalgamation happened, what all things will happen? First thing first, A Limited will transfer certain assets to B Limited. Is that a transfer? Answer is no. It is not a transfer. When these assets are sold by B Limited, already as we discussed, the period of holding of these assets by A Limited should be included in the period of holding of these assets by B Limited. Yes. And same way, cost of acquisition of these assets in the hands of A Limited will be considered as if it is the cost of acquisition of assets in the hands of B Limited. That's what we just now looked at in 49.1. So that is company to company assets we are talking. That is one level. Now shareholders is different story. Shareholders of A Limited, what they will do in this transaction called amalgamation? What they will do? They will now become shareholders of B Limited. That means they give up the shares of A Limited and they take in lieu of that the shares of B Limited. So give up A Limited shares, take B Limited shares. Was this a transfer? Once again, no, because section 47 excluded that also. When you are giving up one form of share and just getting another form of share, it is not a transfer. Now, when these shares in B Limited are sold, then what? Then two things will happen. One, the period of holding of A Limited's shares will be included in the period of holding while calculating B Limited's shares also. That is one thing. And the second thing is, cost of acquisition of A Limited's shares will become the cost of acquisition of B Limited shares because the shareholders of A Limited did not pay anything to buy B Limited shares. They got them. It is just an exchange. They just gave up A Limited shares and got B Limited shares, which are now being sold. At this time, this 49 section we are talking about. Once again, second level transaction, not the first level transaction. First level transaction was not at all transfer. Giving up A Limited shares and taking B Limited shares is not a transfer. Selling B Limited shares is a transfer. But while calculating the cost of acquisition of B Limited shares, these shareholders did not buy them. So how to know the cost of acquisition of B Limited? We cannot know. So what is the option? Only option. We have to take the cost of acquisition of shares of A Limited as if it is the cost of acquisition of B Limited shares also. That's what section 49 is talking about in this point number 2. So what it was talking about in the subclause or point number 7 of 49.1, that is different. That was this situation related to companies. What we are talking about now in this point number 2 is the second situation. So all the parties are there here. In a case of amalgamation, these many things are happening. What is what? In this, which point is asked in the question? We should identify that. We cannot just look at amalgamation and jump to conclusion. What is happening? Who is who? Who is transferor? Who is transferee? What is happening? Is it a transfer or not? If it is a transfer, what is the cost of acquisition? What is the full value of consideration? All these things have to be considered. When assets of A Limited are transferred to B Limited, that is not at all a transfer, so we don't need to worry about anything. Same way, when shareholders of A Limited give up the shares of A Limited and take up the shares of B Limited, that is not a transfer, so we don't have to worry about anything. That is not a transfer at all. But next level, when the shareholders sell those shares in B Limited, then while computing the period of holding of shares in B Limited, we should include the period of holding of shares of A Limited also. First point. Second point, while computing the cost of acquisition of shares of B Limited, because there is no cost of acquisition, we have to take the cost of acquisition of shares in A Limited as if it is the cost of acquisition of shares in B Limited by the shareholders. So the upper portion is about the companies. This is the companies related point, this portion, this entire thing. Whereas the bottom portion is related to shareholders. That is the clarity we should have about any transaction, depending upon whatever the situation that is presented to us in the questions. Now, Moving further. Point number 3. If a person becomes the owner of the shares or debentures in a company during the process of conversion of bonds or debentures, debenture stock, deposit certificates, whatever it is, then the cost of acquisition to that person shall be deemed to be that part of the cost of debentures, debenture stock, bond or deposit certificates which has been converted. Same logic. But here transaction is different. What is the transaction? Just let us take one of them rather than a full list of them. Owner of what originally? Conversion of what is happening? Bonds, debenture or debenture stock or deposit certificates. Let us just take debentures. Debentures are bonds. That is the asset SSE already holds. Already holds this asset. That is not an event. That is not a taxable event. Holding any asset is not a taxable event. But what happened now? Those debentures or bonds are converted, not sold or something, converted into shares. Was that a transfer? No, it is not a transfer. It was not a transfer. But when these shares are sold, second level, then what is the cost of acquisition of these shares? Did the SSE buy those shares? No, he just got them. So what is the cost of acquisition of these shares? Same thing. Whatever the cost of acquisition of originally the debentures or bonds was, that itself becomes the cost of acquisition of these shares also. And we also already know that while computing the period of holding of these shares, we should include the period of holding of those bonds and debentures also. Same logic applies here also in the case of conversion of debentures or bonds into shares. Once again, when are we looking at the cost of acquisition? When should we even think about it? When the second level of transaction happens. In the first level of transaction, we don't need it. Why? Because it is not even a transfer. So, this 49, in all cases if you observe, is about second level. This will be relevant in the second level first of all. In the first level, it is not even relevant in most of the cases. So, this is another scenario where cost of acquisition of original form, there is no previous owner. Owner is same. Form has changed. Original form was different. Now the current form is different. So, cost of acquisition of the original form of the asset becomes the cost of acquisition of current form of the asset. Like that, we can generally take a logical conclusion from that transaction. Then, all of them are not like that. Don't think everything is same. No. Now there is a separate variety situation. Important. Very important. Because it covers two heads of incomes. Naturally. It becomes important. Point number 4. Where the capital gain is arising from the transfer of sweat equity shares. Then what? Then the cost of acquisition of such shares shall be what? There is no previous form and all. SC got them from his employer naturally. So what should be the cost of acquisition? Should we take the real cost of acquisition? No, that would be unfair. What should we take as cost of acquisition? Very important. The fair market value of the shares which has been taken into account for perquisite valuation under section 17(2)(6), which we already understood in the chapter of salaries. Why is that? What is the logic here? Is it the same logic? No, it is not the same logic. Other things had same logic. Either there was a previous owner or there was a previous form of asset, now just converted the new form. That's fine. Logic is same. But now the logic is not same. Now it is a different logic. Identify that and understand it carefully. Now, when we are looking at sweat equity shares or ESOP, let us say, when we are talking about ESOP or sweat equity shares, as we know from the chapter of salaries, what happens originally? We have to look at the entire things. Full history we should know. That is the main point in capital gains. If we look at only now, then confusion will come. Full story of the transaction we should understand. What happened? Okay, originally what happened? Employer allotted some shares to the employee. Fine. Let us say employer has allotted 1000 shares to the employee. On which date the fair market value of those shares was, let us say, 100 rupees. That means 1 lakh rupees was the fair market value of those shares on the date when such option has been accepted or such option has been executed by the employee. That we know from salaries chapter, perquisite. How to calculate perquisite? This is how we calculate. we have to take the fair market value of those shares on the date when the employee has accepted that option. But is 1 lakh the perquisite? No. Employer would have charged something, no? He would have charged some lesser amount. So whatever the amount that is charged from the employee, that is the actual purchase price for employee. Let us say 60 rupees the employer has charged. That means how much was taxed as perquisite already in the salaries chapter or head of income? 40,000. That was already done. That is the story, original background. Now come to the present. That is a flashback. Now what is the present scenario? This employee has sold these shares. He sold these shares, all 1,000. For simplicity, let us take, he has sold all the shares at say 150 rupees. So 1,50,000 rupees is the full value of consideration. For simplicity, let us consider this as a short-term capital asset so that indexation and all need not be done. Logic is important. Computations are clerical. So, sale proceeds is 1,50,000. Question is not that. Question is, what is cost of acquisition? How much he paid for them? 60,000. So, should we take 60,000 as cost of acquisition and say that 90,000 would be taxable? No, that would be unfair. Why? Because already you taxed 40,000, which was the difference between fair market value of those shares and the original purchase price. How can you tax it once again under capital gains? That would be wrong. So what should we do? 1,50,000 is same. That is the sale proceeds of these shares when the employee sold them. But what should be taken as cost of acquisition? Not 60,000. It should be taken as fair market value, which was already taxed in the chapter of salaries, in the head of income salaries. So how much is going to be taxable under the capital gains now? 50,000 only. Of course, the total benefit or income that employee has earned, the SSC has earned is 90,000, no doubt. But you cannot have 40,000 plus 90,000. That will be double taxation. So we cannot take the original purchase price now. Now the point after all this, what was the point? Cost of acquisition of ESOP shares for the employee who has now sold these shares is how much? Answer is, how much ever was taken as its fair market value while valuing the perquisite under section 17(2). That's it. Whatever was taken as perquisite for the purpose of computation of perquisite under section 17(2), whatever was taken as fair market value, this was the fair market value. Whatever was taken there as a taxable amount, the same amount becomes deductible here. That's all. That is the meaning of this provision. That is point number 4. Logic has to be understood. Same thing cannot be taxed twice. That is the logic. So 40,000 was taxed under salaries, 50,000 will be taxed under capital gains. Of course, capital gains might have indexation benefit also if it is a long-term capital asset, but unnecessarily we don't need to complicate it for understanding the logic of it. In the real problems, if it comes, we have to take it anyway. But the point is, what is the cost of acquisition we should take as fair market value of the shares which was considered as the fair market value while valuing perquisite under section 17(2). That's it. If indexation required to be given to that fair market value, we will give that. That's a different story. But why the cost of acquisition of such shares is taken as if it is a fair market value? Because that much amount was already subjected to tax under the head of salaries under section 17(2)(6). That's it. Fine. Then another thing, this is also logically same, nothing new. If there is a mutual fund scheme or plan, we don't need to go into the differences of those things. But once again, what is the transaction that we know? There is a consolidating. Ing is there, ting, and consolidated is there. So ting and ted both are there. So ting is what? Original. Ted is what? New. When the SSC has originally held some units in the consolidating scheme or plan of mutual funds, he held it already, but those were all consolidated into a new scheme of mutual funds. It may so happen practically that some people may have same fund manager, different mutual funds may be there. Lot of times we will say Franklin Templeton Blue Chip Fund, Franklin Templeton Fortune 500 Fund, like that different names funds will be there. Ultimately, the underlying shares that these mutual funds hold may be more or less the same. Then sometimes the mutual fund may say, why to have all these funds? Let us consolidate all of them. Let us have one fund which is a consolidated fund. And that is what we are looking at. Practically, we don't need to know all these things, what is mutual fund and all that at this level. If really we want to know each and every word of capital gains itself, first we should know strategic financial management at final level. So then we have to come back to capital gains. That becomes too time taking, unnecessary. Basic concepts enough. What is mutual fund? That is enough. Mutual fund will have some units like shares for a company. For mutual funds, those are called units. And what the SEC originally held, he had certain units in consolidating schemes of mutual fund. Now those are all converted into consolidated scheme of or plan of mutual fund. Was that a transfer? We know that it was not a transfer. That is gone. That was not a transfer anyway, because nothing happened. SEC gave up some units and he got some units. So just form of the asset has changed. Now, same logic. When the SEC sold these consolidated units of mutual fund, second layer, what is the cost of acquisition for these units of consolidated scheme? Did he buy them? No, he did not buy them. Then how he got them? He got them because he already held the units in consolidating scheme of mutual funds. So what will be the cost of acquisition of these assets which are now sold? Since there is no cost of acquisition for them, what we have to take? Whatever the cost of acquisition of consolidating scheme of mutual funds is there, the same thing becomes the cost of acquisition of consolidated scheme of or plan of mutual funds also. Same logic. If the asset SEC has acquired the assets in a consolidated scheme or plan of mutual fund, then the cost of acquisition of such units in the consolidated plan or scheme of mutual fund shall be deemed to be the cost of acquisition to him of the units in the consolidating plan or scheme of mutual funds. So the sentences, however they may be framed, the same sentence can be reversed also. We should not be confused with the sentence formation. Sentence formation can be done in two ways. But ultimately, essence is what we should remember, understand. What is essence? Originally, SEC held consolidating units. In lieu of them, he got consolidated units. Now he is selling the consolidated units. What is the cost of acquisition of these things? It is nothing but the cost of acquisition of original consolidating units. Dot. That is the essence of that point. Now, sixth point is also similar, just change in form. When a person becomes the owner of equity shares in a company during the process of conversion of preference shares. Same thing. What originally the SEC had held? Originally the SEC had held, let us say, convertible preference shares. He had them. Then only the conversion was possible. So SEC originally purchased convertible preference shares. No problem. He can do that. And those are now converted into equity shares. That is not a transfer. We know that already. So that is not the first layer we are looking at. Now these equity shares are sold. Same thing. Story is there. Then what is the cost of acquisition of these equity shares? We don't know because SEC did not purchase them. So what should we take? Whatever the cost of acquisition of the original preference shares is, that itself becomes the cost of acquisition of these equity shares also. And same way, period of holding of the original preference shares will be included while calculating the period of holding of these equity shares also. All of them are same logic. That's what is point number 6. Now another important point comes. This is an important one for particularly MCQs, because this is where most of the times people will get confused or mixing the things up, because all of them have same logic. They will apply the same logic for demerger also. Demerger is a different type of transaction. We should distinguish it from other types of transactions. In all the other types of transactions, if you want to generalize them, we can say SEC was acquiring the assets from a previous owner, whoever that owner may be, and cost of acquisition of previous owner itself was considered as cost of acquisition of SEC. Fine. Or on the other side, in the remaining cases, SEC originally held certain type of asset in some form, and that form has been converted into some other new form, and the new form asset is sold now. What is the cost of acquisition of that new form? We don't know. That is why the cost of acquisition of whatever the assets in original form was considered to be the cost of acquisition of the new form also. Of course, that logic does not apply to sweat equity shares because already certain amount was taxed earlier. So we cannot say cost of acquisition of real cost of acquisition of sweat equity shares will be taken. We cannot take that. Rather, we have to take fair market value of the sweat equity shares, which was considered for valuation of perquisite under the head of salaries. That is a different exception. Other than that, remaining things are all having same logic. The original form of asset was different. New form has emerged because of some transaction. That could be amalgamation, or that could be conversion of debentures, that could be conversion of shares, preference shares into equity shares, that could be converting the consolidating plan of mutual funds to consolidated plan of mutual funds. All of them have same logic. Can we apply the same logic for demerger also when it comes to cost of acquisition? Now the answer is no, we cannot. Why is that? For that we should understand the demerger concept once again very clearly. What is demerger? What is demerger? There is a demerged company first of all. Demerged company is there, which is a bigger company. So let us say Reliance Industries is the demerged company, and there is a resulting company. Okay, resulting company is there. Also, let us say Jio is the resulting company. For example, Reliance Industries demerged company, Jio is the resulting company. Fine. Then demerger happened already. What all things can happen there? So many things will happen there. Assets of certain portion of assets, not all. Some of the assets of the demerged company will come to resulting company. Yes. Is that a transfer? No. Something is taxable? No, it is nothing taxable because it was excluded from the definition of transfer already under section 47. That is over. Assets transfer by demerged company to resulting company is not a transfer, provided resulting company is an Indian company. That always is there. Then also there will be shareholders in original company, that is demerged company, Reliance Industries shareholders. What they will do? Will they give up the shares of Reliance Industries to get the shares of Jio? No, sir. Why they will give? Reliance is a big cake. In that, Jio is only a small portion. This portion only. Why they will give up the big cake for a small piece? They will not give up. They will not give up entire Reliance shares. They will not give up anything actually. Shareholders continue to hold the shares in the Reliance Industries also, but freshly they will get shares in Jio also. So now they have two shares. They have Reliance Industries shares also, they have Jio shares also. When the Jio shares are sold, cost of acquisition of Reliance Industries shares, can it be taken as the cost of acquisition of Jio shares? That is the logic. Answer is no, we cannot, because Reliance is a big company. And by the way, Reliance shares are not sold here. What are sold? Jio shares are only sold. So original shares are still there. They have not gone anywhere. So the point is now, what is the cost of acquisition of these Jio shares? Actually, how much shareholders paid for buying these Jio shares? Did nothing. They did not pay anything. They just got them. They did not buy them. So situation and problem is same, but solution is not the same. In case of amalgamation, it is okay. You can take the cost of acquisition of shares in amalgamating company as if they are the cost of acquisition of shares in amalgamated company, because amalgamating company is gone. Amalgamated company only remains. But demerger is not the same. In the case of demerger, demerged company continues, resulting company also continues. Now, what is the cost of acquisition of these shares of resulting company in the hands of that shareholder? Now, who is selling these shares of that resulting company? In our example, Jio shares. What is the cost of acquisition? 0? No, we cannot take. Reliance company's entire shares? No, we cannot take. What should we take? No option. We have to take proportionate cost of acquisition. That is the point here. So in case of a demerger, that is the seventh point. Cost of acquisition of shares in the resulting company shall be what? The amount which bears to the cost of acquisition of shares held by the SSE in the demerged company, the same proportion as the net book value of the assets transferred in a demerger bears to the net worth of the demerged company immediately before such demerger. Provisions will look like this only. Sentence, if you just read it, you will not understand anything. Break them. What is the cost of acquisition of shares in resulting company? Question mark is that. Answer is what? the amount which bears to the cost of acquisition of shares held by SSE in the demerged company. That means original cost of acquisition of shares in the demerged company, what was there, that is reality which was there, but that cannot be taken as if it is a cost of acquisition of shares in resulting company. So what we have to take? We have to take a proportionate amount. Which proportion? The same proportion as the net book value of the assets transferred in the demerger, which is numerator, bears to the net worth of the demerged company, that is denominator, immediately before such demerger. That means out of this entire cake, how much percentage is actually transferred by the demerged company to the resulting company? Let us say 80% is remaining in the demerged company and continuing. Just for example, 20% of the assets are only transferred by demerged company to resulting company. If that is the case, then if a person purchased the Reliance Industries share at 2000 rupees originally, imagine, then what will be the cost of acquisition of the shares in Jio Limited, which he did not buy? That will be 20% of 2000 only. That means only 400 rupees will be the cost of acquisition. Then naturally, what will be the cost of acquisition of Reliance shares if he sells them also? Can we take 2000 once again? No, that will be 1600. So simple point is, the shares which were originally held by the shareholder in the demerged company have to be split into what extent that is representing the value of resulting company, to what extent it is representing the value of original company, which was demerged company. Of course, prior to demerger, somebody was already a shareholder of Reliance. After demerger, somebody buys freshly Reliance shares, that is a different story. That is not what we are looking at. Something happened once already the shareholder is there prior to the demerger. While he was already a shareholder, which was originally worth 2000, which he purchased them long back. Now, after the demerger, how much proportion of the assets were transferred by the demerged company to resulting company? Let us say 20% transferred. Then the cost of acquisition of Jio shares, though actually practically it is zero, we cannot take zero. We have to take the same proportion. That means 20% of the cost of acquisition of original demerged company, 2000. 400 will be taken as cost of acquisition of resulting company's shares in the hands of shareholder. Once this is known, automatically the remaining amount will continue to be the cost of acquisition of shares in demerged company after demerger, if those are sold also in future. So cost of acquisition calculation is very important for demerger, which is different from other cases. In all other cases, we just said, whatever is previous, that is the same thing now. Whatever is previous, that is the same thing now. For demerger, it is not the case. Logic changes. Whatever is previous, it is not the same. In the previous, it was 100%. Now, that has been split into parts. 2 parts normally. So, what is the each part value? Naturally, we have to calculate according to the proportions what they hold. And how to calculate these proportions? Here we have already just taken a simple example, 80%, 20%. But in how to calculate it? So simply speaking, first we have to take the cost of acquisition of shares in demerged company, in our example, which is 2000, into B by C, net book value of the assets transferred in a demerger, divided by net worth of the demerged company. So out of the total net worth of demerged company, which is C, how much percentage of net book value of the assets were transferred to the resulting company in the transaction of demerger is B. So then B by C is the proportion which has to be applied onto the cost of acquisition of shares in the demerged company, so that we get the cost of acquisition of shares in resulting company. Then naturally certain words which are used here need explanation. Like what? What is net worth? What is net worth? Net worth means the aggregate of the paid up share capital and general reserves as appearing in the books of accounts of demerged company immediately before the demerger. So denominator is nothing but shareholders' funds, simply speaking. Paid up share capital plus general reserves. Not like all reserves, general reserves you can say. We don't need to really worry about those things much, because those will be given in the question, and net worth can be calculated by looking at shareholders' funds. When we know the net worth and we know out of this net worth how much book value of the assets have been transferred by the net book value, in the sense assets minus liabilities also might be transferred, right? That much is B. So B by C is what we looked at as 20%. That means out of 100, which is net worth of the company, 20 have been transferred by demerged company to resulting company. So once we know that, that proportion shall be used on to the original cost of acquisition of shares in demerged companies, so that we get the cost of acquisition of shares in resulting company. So that's a very crucial variety type of transaction, demerger, particularly related to cost of acquisition. But this complication is not there for computing period of holding. What is the computation of period of holding for shares in Jio Limited? No problem. You can just include the period of holding of shares in Reliance also. Period of holding is just a time period that can be just added. But cost of acquisition cannot be taken just like that. It has to be taken proportionately, particularly when it comes to demerger. Now, eighth one is also what we are just discussed, remaining amount. The cost of acquisition of original shares held by the shareholder in the demerged company, that is original 2000, shall be reduced by the amount so arrived at above in relation to the cost of acquisition of shares in the resulting company. So what is the question here in this point number 8 is, how much will be the cost of acquisition of Reliance shares after the demerger? Before demerger that was 2000. After demerger, how much it is? Naturally it is 1600. You have to reduce whatever the value that has been already found out in point number 7, so that you get cost of acquisition of shares in the demerged company after demerger. That's it. So 7th and 8th point are related with each other. Very important. Small question can be asked, or even MCQs. 2 marks MCQs can be very well asked from this. So remember this particular point carefully. Logically only okay, but because there are technical words like net book value, net worth, we need to remember those things also. For other things, logic is enough. Don't need to separately by heart them, understand them, that is enough. Automatically, with the common sense, with the logical understanding of them, we can remember them easily. Now once again, another aspect has come related to some other head of income. Like when we had this ESOP in point number 4 ESOP, we had 2 heads of incomes. One is salaries first, then capital gains next. Now point number 9 also is similar, but here income from other sources first, then we have capital gains. So first income from other sources, then we have capital gains. So 2-layered transaction once again this also. What is it? Let us understand. We don't need to know income from other sources now itself, but logic you can understand. Let us say, where there is any capital gain arising from the transfer of such property which has been subjected to tax under section 56(2)(10), which is related to gift, the cost of acquisition of the property shall be deemed to be the value taken into account for the purposes of section 56(2)(10). It's not X, it is 10, but anyway, the point is, logic is same. We should not double tax the same amount. If some amount was already taxed earlier under income from other sources, we cannot make the same thing taxable again under capital gains. That is the point. So here there is one thing that in advance, before discussing income from other sources, we should know. That is related to gift. See, when we say gift, when the donor is giving the gift and somebody is receiving the gift. So in one case, let us say if the gift is received by the relatives, gift is given by one relative to another relative, that is not at all taxable in the hands of the receiver according to income from other sources. But if the gift is received by a non-relative, from a non-relative, we can say, both are same. If the gift is received from a non-relative, then that gift could be taxable under income from other sources. So, if it is already taxed under income from other sources, then again it cannot be taxed under capital gains. So, for example, just for example, let us say A has gifted some 2 lakhs rupees worth of, we are talking about what? Capital asset here. If A gifts 2 lakhs rupees cash to somebody, there is no capital gain next level. Cash cannot have capital gain. There should be some asset. Let us say he has gifted a land, something, to B, worth 2 lakhs rupees. How do we know the worth? That will be stamp duty valuation. We will come to that. But A gifted worth 2 lakhs rupees worth land to B free. If A and B are not at all related, this entire 2 lakhs will be taxable in the hands of B. Already in the hands of B, this 2 lakhs rupees is taxable under the head of income from other sources. That is over already. That story is over. But did B really pay any money to purchase this asset? No. He did not pay anything. So what was his cost of acquisition? 0. Now when he sold this asset, what should be the cost of acquisition? Should we take 0? That would be unfair. Because already 2 lakhs rupees was taxed under income from other sources. So how much should be taken as cost of acquisition? Ideally, 2 lakhs only should be taken as cost of acquisition. Whatever was already taxed, the amount that was already subjected to tax under section 56(2)(10) shall be considered to be the cost of acquisition now when that asset is sold. For better understanding, let us say original asset transferred by A to B was not for 2 lakhs, it was for 50,000 only. That means the worth of the asset is 2 lakhs, but A sold asset to B for 50,000 only. Sold, not just a gift, it is sold also, no problem. But it is as good as a gift only. Gift is not about only without consideration. Even if it is for inadequate consideration, we can consider the same way. Inadequate consideration, A has sold an asset to B worth 2 lakhs rupees for 50,000 only. That is a transfer for A. There you cannot say it is not a transfer because it is not a pure gift. But what about B? For B, 1,50,000 would be taxable under income from other sources because he received a benefit worth 1,50,000. He got an asset worth 2 lakhs by paying only 50,000. That means there is a benefit of 1,50,000 taxable under income from other sources. But how much he paid? Actually 50,000. This 1,50,000 was already taxed under income from other sources. Now, once again, when the asset is sold by B, what should be taken as cost of acquisition? Whatever the amount that was already taxed under income from other sources should be taken as cost of acquisition of asset for B. So once again, original cost anyway 50,000 plus 1,50,000 which was also taxed under income from other sources. So 2 lakhs should be taken as cost of acquisition for B when he sells his asset later. So the point here is logically same as ESOP. Once an amount has already been taxed under income from other sources for being a gift or an asset received without adequate consideration, then that amount which was already taxed under income from other sources cannot be taxed once again in capital gains. That is why whatever was already taxed under the income from other sources shall be taken as cost of acquisition of the asset for the purpose of capital gains. That is one of the other special points under section 49. Because here if you take 50,000 as cost of acquisition, that would be unfair. Because already amount was taxed under income from other sources. So 50,000 cannot be taken as cost of acquisition. 2 lakhs should be taken as cost of acquisition because 1,50,000 was already taxed. 50,000 is original cost of acquisition. Total will be 2 lakhs. Like that. This income from other sources and capital gains can also be clubbed and combined in some questions. Of course, we are not going to look at those application of 56. Now, we will discuss that after the completion of capital gains chapter also and income from other sources chapter also. Then we will get more clarity on that. At this point, our job is only to understand the logic. What is the logic of 9th point and 4th point? Similar. Once an amount is already taxed under another head of income, it cannot be taxed again under this head of income. That is the logic. Now, 10th point is also another important transaction. Different variety transaction. Each of them is a different transaction. All are important, but each of them is unique type of transactions. Not like similar things like just purchase and sale of assets. We don't have all these issues. But purchase and sale of assets is not happening. Something else variety is happening. What is this? This is 45(5)(a). Something related to development agreement. 45(5)(a). We will come to the details of that also in this chapter only later. But logic of this has to be understood now itself. Then while we read that 45.5a, it becomes easier for us to comprehend that section later. So what is happening here? Where the capital gain arises from the transfer of a capital asset being a share in the project in the form of land or building or both, referred to in section 45.5a, which is chargeable to tax in the previous year in which the completion certificate for the whole or part of the project is issued by the competent authority. That means already that is dealt with by 45.5a. But the asset that is now transferred by the SSE is that share in the project which he received in the form of land or building. Then, what is cost of acquisition of such asset? That shall be the amount which is deemed as full value of consideration in that section. So in 45.5a, what was deemed as full value of consideration? That will be now considered as cost of acquisition. What is it deemed as full value of consideration? We will come to that later. Just understand the logic. For that, let us understand first of all what is this 45.5a. This is simply this can be called as development agreement. Normally what happens? This is a quite common transaction in real life also. Somebody will have a piece of land, okay, whatever the shape it may be, and he will give it for development to some contractor or some builder. Some builder will come and say, boss, I will build an apartment here, some 4-5 floors, and there will be a total of 10 apartments that can be built on this land. I will give you 4 out of them. So 40% to the landowner, 60% to the builder. Because builder incurs all the expenditure of construction for building that apartments. Like these agreements can be made between the landowners and builders. That is development agreement covered under section 45.5a. But the point is not that. That will anyway come to it later under 45.5a. The landowner already agreed to give up his land. Okay, he gave up his land. Builder has taken the land and developed also. After the development completed, the developer gave these 4 flats to the landowner. Did the landowner receive any money? Maybe yes. That is also definitely full value of consideration. When the landowner receives these assets, 4 apartments plus some cash, let us say, this entire amount is full value of consideration, right? But this cash is already there separately. Cash is not a capital asset. What is the capital asset here? That is the one which that landowner has received his share in the project in the form of land or building or both. So, whatever is the full value of consideration that was taken in that original transfer, what was original transfer? Land given up and these things taken up. Land was going out, 4 apartments and cash are coming in. That was also a transfer. That is also taxable under 45.5a. For that, full value of consideration will be taken in accordance with the value of those land or building. That is a different transaction. Already happened that transaction. It was already taxed under 45.5a. That is not what we are talking about. And what is the cost of acquisition of land? That is reality. He would have got it from his fathers and all. We'll go back and see the cost of acquisition of previous owner, or he himself would have bought. So here the cost of acquisition is not the problem in the first level. Full value of consideration is the problem because he is not receiving completely in cash. Some cash and some buildings he is receiving. So there, how to calculate full value of consideration? Some provision is required. That is 45.5a. We'll come to that. Though it happens first in reality. Discussion wise, we'll come to that later. But now what we are talking, these 4 apartments are out of them 2 or some of them have been sold now. Those are sold. Let us assume for simplicity purposes, the 4 apartments that the landowner has received as his share in the development agreement, he has sold now. Second level. This entire section 49 is second level only. In the first level, something else will cover it. Second level only we are covering now. In the second level, whatever the 4 apartments, 4 flats that the landowner has received as his share of land and buildings, now he has sold them. Now the point comes, what is the cost of acquisition of this particular flats? Did he purchase them? No, he did not. Did he construct them by incurring cost? No, he did not. He just got it. by virtue of the development agreement which he has entered into with the developer by giving up his land. So what is the cost of acquisition now? Naturally, whatever the full value of consideration earlier already taxed under section 45A becomes the cost of acquisition of those assets now. Logic is once again same. ESOP also, 56 also, here also. What is the logic? Certain amount has already been taxed under some other section, whether it is salary 17(2), whether it is income from other sources 56, or whether it is within capital gains 45(5)(a). Earlier certain amount was already subjected to tax. Now, second level, when the transfer happens, what should be the cost of acquisition of such asset? Be it ESOP, in that case, it will be the amount of fair market value which was considered for the purpose of computation of perquisite. In case of 56, whatever the amount that was taxed in the head of income from other sources chapter, that will become the cost of acquisition now. In case of 45(5)(a), whatever the full value of consideration which was subjected to tax under 45(5)(a) earlier, now becomes the cost of acquisition. That's it. That is 45(5)(a) next level. So we are looking at the second layered transaction. First layer transaction is still pending in two cases. 9th and 10th case, first level transaction we have not yet discussed. Of course, the 9th case we will discuss in the next chapter itself. We will not discuss now. But 10th case, incidentally, will be discussed in this chapter. 4th case was easy for us. Why? Because we already know it. Only because of that. Because we know how the perquisite valuation happens in case of ESOP. We know that already in the head of salaries, that is how it is done. So now it becomes easier for us to understand, okay. When now the ESOP shares are sold, cost of acquisition of such shares is nothing but the fair market value which was already subjected to tax under the head of salaries. So it was easier to understand since we know it already. But 9th and 10th, 9th particularly, we will understand after the income from other sources. We can actually skip that also for the time being. Don't worry about it much. 10th one, part of this chapter only. So 45(5)(a) when we discuss, we will get more clarity on that. But by understanding the transaction, we can get clarity already. Whatever 45(5)(a) says, whatever is taken as full value of consideration under 45(5)(a) in a development agreement type of situation, the same full value of consideration will be taken as cost of acquisition when those land or buildings are sold which were received by the SSE as part of his share of the project under 45(5)(a). These are variety situations where the cost of acquisition of assets has to be determined according to section 49. All of them are unique, all of them are separate, different types of transactions. So you should know them very well, understand the logic of them very well. Wherever we can apply, we can group them also. What are the logics that we can apply here? One logic is previous owner logic. Second logic is previous form of asset. All the multiple points will come into that. Conversion, amalgamation, etc. Then consolidated plan of mutual funds, they will come in that. Another logic is something already which was taxed under either salaries or income from other sources or even capital gains under 45(5)(a). That is third category. Fourth category is only unique category, that is demerger, which has to be taken proportionately. In what proportion? Net book value of the assets transferred divided by net worth of the demerged company is the proportion which should be applied on the original cost of acquisition of the shares in demerged company, so that we get the cost of acquisition of shares in resulting company. And if that is reduced from the original cost of acquisition of the demerged company, we will also get cost of acquisition of shares in the demerged company after demerger. So 4 categories of logic, if you can understand this section 49, that will be helpful. Once again I am repeating, these are not so important for the normal problem computation under capital gains chapter. If at all capital gains chapter normal examination questions are to be discussed, there is nothing actually that can be just discussed in maybe 3-4 classes, done. Because it's a mechanical thing, we know already. What is the computation methodology? We take full value of consideration, gross sale proceeds, deduct expenses, get net sale proceeds, deduct cost of acquisition or indexed cost of acquisition as the case may be. Deduct also cost of improvement or indexed cost of improvement as the case may be. You got capital gains, long term or short term as the case may be. Done. That's it. Normally computation is only that. But the point is not about only the regular purchase and sale of assets. Purchase and sale of assets is okay. These are variety situations. They may not be tested at a CA intermediate level from a problem point of view, but since we have MCQs also, any of these things can be asked in MCQ, so we cannot ignore them. To be very frank, almost like 3-4 years back or 2 years back, or when the MCQs were not there, these points I used to tell. Those students who can understand, you better understand them. Those students who think that there is some kind of confusion in this, generally there should not be if we have logic. If at all there is any confusion, you leave it, I used to tell. But now we don't have that facility. You have to understand the logic of each of them, remember them also, because we have MCQs also, that facility is not there. We cannot leave certain provisions just because they may not be useful for problem solving. That is why these have to be discussed in detail, these have to be understood and also applied if required, particularly in MCQs. Other than that, normal things which are more important for the computation of problems are already done, discussed. Of course, in the coming sessions, we will discuss some other variety transactions where the computation of capital gains itself will be little different with the same logic. Logic is not going to be different, it is the same. But in certain cases, finding out the cost of acquisition of the asset was the challenge, which was answered by section 49. Finding out the period of holding of the asset was a challenge because the asset was not just directly obtained or purchased. So we already applied that also and computed period of holding by including the period of holding of previous firm or previous owner as well. And in certain cases there is no transfer at all. That was section 47. All these three are similar and linked to each other. If you understand the thread of logic, they are very simple, nothing is complicated in that. For that purpose, you need to read, understand, listen to these things very carefully and try to understand the links, understand the total picture rather than just looking at one point at a time. Entire sequence of events we have to understand. Then the total transaction will have clarity, there will not be any confusion in that. So that is a different types of transaction related to section 49 also. With that, all these big things, corporate level things, actually most of them are done with. From the next class onwards, we will continue with the normal transactions, something like conversion of capital asset into stock and trade, what happens then, or insurance type of situation, or something like slump sale, or something like depreciable assets, which we already know how to calculate capital gains. These are the things which are normal things, and particularly the things related to land and buildings, how to calculate the full value of consideration under 50C. I already told you, which is similar to section 43 CA in PGBP. Same logic is applicable to capital gains in 50C. So we'll discuss those section 50 series after 49. Naturally 50, 50B and 50C, etc. Those sections will discuss and continue in the next session. Till then, take care. Bye bye. Thank you very much.